Hi there, I'm Armante Butler, the LGBTQ Health and Rights Senior Program Manager at Advocates for Youth. Advocates for Youth is an organization that works to ensure young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights are accessible. I'm proud to work there. I'm so happy to be hosting this panel as part of Sex Ed for All Month with Advocates for Youth. Every May, organizations around the country participate in Sex Ed for All, ensuring that young people get medically accurate information that is culturally competent, age appropriate, and LGBTQ inclusive. We thought it'd be interesting to have a series of conversations directly with young people to talk about what we didn't learn in sex ed and what we wish we had learned. And today's topic is gender transitioning, or as we're calling it, your gender journey. Let's start with a couple of definitions. So everyone experiences gender differently. Some folks are assigned male at birth and their gender isn't male. And their gender is male. That's been called cisgender. But for other folks, it's not that straightforward. Some folks get assigned female at birth, but come to understand themselves as boys. For instance, that can happen anytime in life from young childhood to old age. Other folks know that they're not cisgender, but they also don't fill other set of categories of gender that are fit into these boxes. Those folks may use gender queer to describe themselves. There are a lot of ways to think about gender, and as we cover them all today, but we won't cover them all today, but we hope to do is talk with young people about how they've grappled gender and navigated their journeys and get their perspectives. We're going to specifically look at gender transitioning. That's when you start to present yourself in ways that don't, quote, match up with the gender folks have assigned for you or expected you to be. This can be anything from changes in dress and makeup to hormones to gender affirmation surgery. The young folks on this panel are each in some part of a journey and are here to talk about it today. So let's get started with intros. Can you share your name, pronouns, and the first time you remember thinking about your gender?
I'll go first. Okay, hello everyone that is watching or listening, wherever. My name is Deontay. I use both he and she pronouns because I am gender nonconforming. As early as I can remember, I started thinking about my gender expression in college, I want to say. Like my gender was always questioned, like thinking back to like middle school, but I never questioned it myself until I got to college and started meeting other genderqueer individuals.
Hello, friends. This is Amira Khan. My pronouns are she, hers. And the first time that I actually looked at gender with like a critical eye, not gender critical, that's something entirely different, but was when in college as well. It was like maybe sophomore, junior year. I was learning a lot more about patriarchy that I didn't know before, and I was like, as a person who is brought up as a man, I have never experienced sort of the oppression that like cis women go through. So let me try to empathize with them. And so my way of empathizing was to just like listen more first, but also dress more femme. And then doing that, I experienced gender euphoria, and I was like, oh shit, this fits a little too on the nose. So that's sort of how I started my gender journey.
Hello. I'm August Clayton. I use he and they pronouns. I think the first time I thought about my gender in like an expression way was in high school, but I didn't engage with my gender identity until my second year in college.
Thank you all so much. As again I said, I'm really glad to be talking with you all today and for you all to be sharing this crucial information around gender transitioning, gender journeys, and sex education. Can each of you say a little bit about your gender journey and or gender transitioning journey and where you are with it?
I like calling it a journey because that implies that there's no destination in mind, which is the case with a lot of people. It's kind of like I don't know what I'll end up being one day when I'm 50, if I make it to 50, but I know that today I want to be more femme. And so part of my journey has been learning and educating myself on like what are the effects of like estrogen and testosterone blockers, right? Because that medical transition is a part of my journey. And also I didn't have any representation of queer Muslims or LGBTQ plus Muslims historically or like in the modern day, in the 21st century. And so slowly I did learn that historical figures were transgender and Muslim and or queer and Muslim, and that has never been sort of that their history has been erased, but that they have always existed.
My gender identity has always been questioned by other people. Like my friends that joke around and be like, "Oh, you should be a girl for a day." Da 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 da. Like, because I was always feminine, even before I came out as gay. Like, I was always really feminine. And once I got to high school and I finally came out, that's when I started experimenting more with my gender expression. I started wearing more female clothing, started cropping all my shirts, you know, getting real fun with it. And then once I started doing more volunteer work within the community, started getting more familiar with other queer individuals within the city, that's when I started meeting other people who didn't identify as either male or female. That's when I got introduced to the terms non-binary and transgender and things like that. So I was like, okay, this is definitely new. And like getting over like the pronoun part, like child, that was a journey. That was a journey in itself. So learning about other people, it really made me start like questioning myself, like, because I do not feel like one of the dudes. And although I do feel like one of the girls, sometimes I don't always feel like one of the girls. So I was like, where exactly do I stand? I just knew that I wasn't trans. I knew for a fact that I did not identify as transgender. So I was really like questioning, like, what exactly am I? So doing more research, I was like, you know what? I don't have to be either one. I can fit somewhere in the middle within that spectrum, be whatever the hell I want to be. And that's when I finally settled on gender nonconforming, because the way I am, I do not conform to the idealism. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly, but I do not conform to what society deems as being a man or a woman. I like to do whatever I want to do. And if you're confused, well, you better go do your research the same way I did. Educate yourself.
So I've been medically and legally transitioning for 2 years, since May 10th, 2018. I identify as a trans man, but I've been socially transitioning for years longer, whether or not I knew I was trans or not. And I've been, I would say, like emotionally gender expansive since I was young. I would say in middle school, I also had those questions, specifically in 8th grade, if I wanted to be a boy or a girl, because I was always what was considered like a tomboy or whatever. And I think in high school was when I really started to toy with my gender expression, specifically wearing men's clothes, like sneaking around, going and buying men's underwear and like men's jeans and everything, and just trying to like keep it under wraps. I got found out, but once I got into college, I had a non-binary roommate, and I kind of just explained my upbringing and how I didn't really know what I was, because the question has always been about sexuality and not necessarily gender identity. So essentially they asked me like, do you think that you might be trans? And I was like, I don't really know what that is. So we spent, I want to say like a few days just looking up these various identities, going to LGBTQ orgs on campus, and I kind of got my answer. At the time, I wasn't like, oh, like I didn't know I could medically transition. I didn't know I could change my name for any of these reasons. It was just like, I am not a woman. And then I started toying with like pronouns. I started asking folks to call me by my initials and using they, them. And then it kind of just progressed to the point where I felt more home in my identity and then in my expression. And then I was like, yeah, I think I want to start medically transitioning. So I, went to a clinic in Philly and got met with just a lot of care that I didn't know existed. And it kind of just expanded off of that. I just know like my journey in and of itself hasn't necessarily ended. I haven't reached a destination. I don't believe I'm going to.
The next question is, say something or a couple of things you wish you had known about issues related to gender as you were growing up and grappling with it.
So I just wish I had known a little bit more about my sexuality and how to speak about it so that I could have gotten to this point quicker. I feel like if I had opened my mouth a lot sooner, I probably would have reached the point where I am now back in like high school. Like, I just wish I knew the vernacular. Like, I wish I had access to the resources. Like, I just wish I had known more. That's all I can really say.
I think part of what I would have liked to have known is that sort of the structure that I would look around and see being like, oh, like men have to be like this and women have to be like that. Like, and sort of learning that internalizing that was an unhealthy process and that it doesn't have to be that way, right? Men can exist as feminine men and not have to be like, and that shouldn't like sort of undermine their masculinity, and vice versa. Women don't have to be completely like high femme all the time and have that undermine their femininity, and that there is the ability, and then that there is way there are people who are neither and people who are both, and that it's sort of like a yin yang fluid sort of mix, and that it didn't have to be very like strict binary categories, right? So like so to understand that like those constructs are social constructs, those are just in the minds of all of us, and that if we decide to change that, then we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I wish I knew a lot of things growing up. And I think, like I said earlier, because this is such a lifelong journey, like, the biggest takeaway for me was language. And I mean, like, the language to just describe how I was feeling, like, and the freedom that I feel now by being able to, like, reimagine those roles and expectations that go along my gender assigned at birth. And, like, I guess what I mean by that is that I grew up in a rural, and I'm like rooted in a very rural area of my state, in the state of Maryland. And like, by a lack of tools and resources, I essentially conflated gender with sexuality. And I didn't know that more existed. And like, by more, I mean like just identities and peace. I think like a lot of peace and life in and of itself existed out of the confines of just being man and woman, and more specifically a cisgender man and a cisgender woman. I had a really hard time labeling my sexuality. And now that I'm at this point in my life, like, I attributed it to, not this idea of knowing who, or not knowing who I love, but not knowing who I am. Or who I was then. And I think like many folks like ascribe false power to difference, right? So like, we'll think, not really me, but we'll think like in bad faith that exposing youth to gender expansion, gender variance, or trans folks will like compel them to transition. And I've always found that to be incredibly harmful, just because like, one, like, exposure isn't persuasive, it's not coercive, it's not forceful in nature. Like, it's really giving the youth the freedom to live. And I think for myself, like, being able to name who I am saved my life countless times over the years, and having the knowledge to, and the support to like even wear what felt comfortable, having the support to name myself and like give myself the agency to survive, was a really transformative experience that I wish I had when I was younger.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank Amira, August, and Deontay for joining us. It was great to talk with you all about your gender journey. Lastly, I'd like to plug in that I Think I Might Be resources, so you can search Advocates for Youth. I Think I Might Be. Resources by and for LGBTQ young people, our queer Muslim resources, really looking at the voices of young people that have either dealt with and finished their gender journeys or are still on their journeys. There's several resources there on our website, advocatesforyouth.org. And I'd like to remind everyone to follow #SexEd for all for more youth-led sex ed this month. Thank you all so much and have a great day.